these days not to know someone with an autistic child. In fact, an estimated 1.5 million Americans have some form of the neurological disorder that typically affects communication and social skills. Increasing at a rate of 10 to 17% each year, it's estimated that 4 million Americans could be diagnosed with the disorder by the end of this decade. We'll find out more. Let's take note with Jack Neisworth, a Penn State professor emeritus of special education and former co-chair of the Autism Specialist Project at Penn State. Dr. Pamela Wolf is an associate professor of special education and heads Penn State's Autism Specialist Project. The two have collaborated on a dictionary of autism and pervasive developmental disorders, which is due out later this year. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thank you.
This whole area of applied behavior analysis is something that has taken off at Penn State. Can you give us an idea of what the impetus was for starting the kinds of programs that you've been involved in the last few years?
Sure. Applied behavior analysis is one of the most effective treatments for children with autism and related disorders. And a number of parents were demanding what they knew were effective treatments instead of lesser treatments. And so there was such a high demand that they were bringing in consultants from other states. So the folks in Harrisburg said, we better start growing our own professionals, our own behavior analysts. And so with that impetus, they contacted us in special education, and we got our faculty together and worked to form the courses which have been approved by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board. So we have a full-blown program now that will enable students to study for that exam.
And in fact, these are master level courses, so educators who are already in the field and now suddenly realizing that they are inundated with children with these special needs are coming as well.
Absolutely. We get calls frequently from teachers who are in the field who are saying, I don't have the background. I'm getting a student in my class who has autism or I believe has autism, and I really would like the training. So yes, very needed.
Now, according to the U.S. Department of Education, autism is increasing at a rate of 10 to 17% each year. And the projection is that as many as 4 million Americans may be affected by this disorder by the end of this decade. I mean, that is absolutely astounding.
Right.
Explain how educating or working effectively with someone with autism may be different from working with children with other developmental disabilities.
Well, I think the first thing we should talk about is that the diversity within the population of what's called autism. It's a spectrum disorder, so you have children who are very severely involved and may have very difficult functioning in all areas, social, language, and presence of a lot of atypical behaviors such as self-injurious behavior. So
banging a head or
head
something.
Banging and biting one's own arm and pulling out one's own hair and that type of thing. So that's a different set of tactics that will have to be used to work with those children than children who are at the milder end of the spectrum, whose main problems would be social skills, for example. So you can't just say, it's not a simple answer, but the instructor and the therapist have to be well trained in order to deal with such a diversity.
Now, there isn't a medical test per se for diagnosing autism, but from everything I've learned and read about it, early diagnosis is key to progress. How typically is a child diagnosed with autism or some part of that along the spectrum, whether it be Asperger's syndrome or full-blown autism?
Well, very often you have a parent who's noticed a difference in their child who said, you know, I'm not getting the eye contact, I'm a little concerned about the repetitive behavior I'm seeing. They may go to a physician who will then say, I'd like to put you in touch with early intervention services. In the field of special education, we've known for so long that early intervention is key. You get to a child early, you're able to give services, they're able to communicate, expand their language so much more, which has such a bearing on learning in general. So early intervention services are very needed. They'll often get a psychologist involved who will then be doing some formalized testing of the student, of the child, observing things to see if some markers or indicators are there for autism. So you'll probably have a number of people who are involved, but very often it emanates from the parents who are saying, I'm noticing this in my child, I didn't notice it in a sibling.
Now, you've mentioned some of the characteristics, but can you be a little more specific for someone who may right at this moment be sitting at home saying, my child is a little bit different?
There are some general categories or indicators of autism dealing with mainly communication. They may have a really restricted language development. They may not use speech at all. It may be repetitive or echolalic, as we say. There are often impairments in social interaction, as Jack mentioned.
So eye contact might not be very good.
That's right, absolutely. And then you have some behavior repertoires that are different. They may be really restricted interest. They may have the stereotypic behavior where it's very repetitive, like body rocking, hand flapping, and so on. And you may have some self-injurious behavior with students who have more severe forms of autism.
Now, experts say that for parents raising an autistic child, can be much more, depending upon the severity of the disability, much more stressful, say, than raising a child with Down syndrome, for example.
Yes. First of all, the history of autism, initially the etiology or causes of it was blamed on the parent.
Refrigerator
mom, right. Bruno Bettelheim promoted that point of view. And so there's been this burden of guilt thrown on parents. And now we know today that that is absolutely not acceptable explanation. But dealing with these children, there are no pills to take, no clear treatments that will solve things. And so there's a lot of judgment and decision making needed by the parent. And the treatments that seem to work the best take a lot of time. 24/7, for example, in the early intensive behavioral approaches, you just don't get a therapist to come in for 20 minutes every other week and do something. You have to work at it constantly. So that's a lot of stress.
Now, the two of you are actually working on a dictionary of autism and I can't think of the other term, but other developmental
pervasive
delays.
Developmental
disorders. The book will be published later this year by Paul Brooks Publishing. Tell us a little bit about who contributed to this book and what you hope, what purpose you hope it serves.
Well, that we can talk about. When we conceived of this project, we thought, you know, this would be a very useful resource for parents and professionals because autism is a multidisciplinary field. And there's a lot of jargon in each profession, and a lot of the professionals don't know each other's, let alone the parent keeping up with that. So we said we're going to do it, but to do it, we couldn't do it ourselves. So we called on colleagues, and we have, Pam, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have about 105 contributors or so to the dictionary, people who are prominent researchers and practitioners in the field.
So there's almost a whole language associated with this particular disability.
Indeed.
With a variety of disciplines, from speech language pathologists to occupational therapists to physical therapists to medical personnel.
And you've mentioned really the team of professionals who work with autistic children.
It takes a team approach. You certainly are drawing from a lot of different fields to give the best therapies and interventions for students.
Now, you have educators flocking literally to your courses to get this kind of background. What advice do you have for parents who are out there dealing with a child who is autistic, who feels they're not getting the services that they need?
I think to collaborate with researchers who are doing current research or cutting edge things would be helpful. Getting involved with support groups would be useful. It will vary with a region and different parts of the country, but not going it alone, making sure that you're looking at, since there are so many disciplines involved, looking at the team effort.
Now, autism was first described by Dr. Leo Kanner back in 1943. And if you think about a generation ago or back to the 1940s or 50s, people with autism, and there didn't seem certainly to me to be as many of them, were placed in institutions. Professionals were less educated about autism than they are today, and specific services that exist today were non-existent then. What's the situation today? What's the outlook for a child with autism today?
Again, the outlook would depend on the initial severity of the program, of the child's problems, and also how early and how intensive the treatments were launched. So with children who have, let's say, the typical kind of autism that we're referring to, if they get early and intensive treatments, the prognosis can be a lot better than what was originally imagined. In fact, there are some people now who claim that autism can be cured, and there are organizations that have the word cure in their names, actually. And we know of a number of children who have absolutely turned around, and they're indistinguishable from typical kids now.
And in fact, many people may have heard, and Grampian, I can't remember her name, maybe you can help me,
Temple Grand?
Temple Grandin.
Temple Grand, who is actually making enormous contributions in the food industry, who is autistic.
She will be at our annual autism conference, which is in August of this year.
Okay, I want to give a website address for anyone interested in finding out more about the courses that are offered through Penn State, the Autism Certificate Program. You can find out more about that program by calling this number. It's area code 814-865-9654, or check out this website. It's www.outreach.psu.edu/statewide programs. That's all one word. /autism. We'll keep that on the screen for another moment. There are a number of myths and misconceptions about autism, and I think one that many people find most devastating is that the misconception is that autistic children are never affectionate. They lack normal emotions. Is that true in all the cases?
You can never say all cases anytime, because children will vary greatly. So no, that's not the case. Many children with autism are very loving and show affection. Now, affection may be shown in a variety of ways. It may be not typical from individual to individual, so it would really vary.
Okay, you mentioned a little earlier, Dr. Neisworth, a summer Penn State Autism Institute or conferences. Give us an idea of what's coming up this summer.
Yes, the first week in August of each year we have a national conference.
And is it open to the public?
It's open to the public, yes. There are courses embedded in that conference that are closed to registered students, but most of the sessions are open to the public. And we have very prominent people from all over the nation that are presenters at that conference. Temple Grandin is one of them, for example.
Okay, and with just literally a couple of seconds remaining, how optimistic are you about how quickly we're learning and making advances in autism and what we know about it?
I'd say it's very rapid, both on the medical front and on the behavioral front.
Okay, on that note, we're out of time. Thank you both so much for being with us. We've been talking with Dr. Pamela Wolf and Dr. Jack Neisworth of Penn State about their Autism Specialist Project. For Take Note, I'm Patty Satalia.
A copy of the program you've just seen can be purchased through Penn State Media Sales at mediasales.psu.edu or by calling 800-770-2111.